What is up? What is up? What is up? It is me, the political kid, here with another one. And yeah, I did recently make a collaboration with Monster Z. You could go to my other latest video. However, I want to talk about a few things. One, he hasn't I'm really excited about what happened. However, I'm really wanting him to make a post on his community page or something, maybe like a reference in maybe one of his new videos talking about me, so it could get a little bit of attention from Monster Z viewers. Because I mean, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. I'm just hoping that by the end of the week that it's been posted, it'll get some attention by Monster Z viewers. So I hope you understand what I'm kind of trying to say. I'm just hoping that I'll get attention. Also, I'm still running for president, and if you're a classmate and you have asked me to make another cringe song again, hell no, I'm not doing that so you could just make fun of me more. But anyway, let's get into the video. So, if you don't know, Calvin Coolidge served for a little bit of Warren Harding's term after he died, won the 1924 election, and went on to have a very stable presidency, which had marked economic growth and just were very conservative times. However, you might have realized that this is the 1920s and something's about to happen. And that is right. Calvin Coolidge did not accept the 1928 election, handing over to a popular figure who was made popular by his philanthropy efforts during World War One. Herbert Hoover, who went on to lead one of the worst presidencies of this country's history, and many within the Republican Party like use him as an example to maybe compare him to other politicians within the Republican Party, to kind of say how he is a horrible person and we don't need another he wasn't a horrible person, but he was a horrible president, and they wouldn't want another Herbert Hoover in office. So yeah. However, why did Calvin Coolidge stay out? Well, he was a silent guy. He was very humble and didn't really want the attention as much. For an example, this is a very popular story. He was at a party, and then a woman said, "There's a bet that if she were to make him say more than 2 words, she would get some money." And guess what his response was? "You lose." And he didn't say anything after that, for the rest of the night. So it kind of shows you the kind of mental and kind of games that were going on in Calvin Coolidge's head. Of course, during the 1928 kind of whole election season, he literally went to reporters, gave them strips of notes saying that I will not be running in the 1928 election. He was very popular, so this was very surprising to a lot of people. However, we can make this change. And also, before we go into this alternate history thing, I've not made one of these in a while, and I made these because of the popularity of my first one on Gerald Ford. However, not a lot of them are as popular today. However, I'm really hoping that it will be more popular. So yeah, maybe go and uh, subscribe. However, a lot of the people who are watching this are subscribed, so I'm really trying to get new viewers. So yeah. So anyways, we're gonna have a few changes. We're gonna make him more ambitious, which isn't really hard. We could have him win even a little bit more in the 1924 election, and more people trying to convince him to run in the 1928 election. And in this timeline, we're gonna have Calvin Coolidge's mental thought be, I don't really want to do this for another 4 years. However, this is a stable presidency, and I could be a little more remembered, so I'll guess I'll run in 1928. And so he does. And he will still win, there's no doubt about it. The Republicans were very popular during this time, right before the Great Depression. However, Great Depression is still happening. The effects of the Hoover's administration's work on it, which actually harmed and prolonged the crisis that was the Great Depression, would be a little bit more restrained. And I feel that with Coolidge's experience, he'd be a little bit more better at it. However, it would still happen, and his popularity would just go down. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Franklin Roosevelt would still run. However, Republicans would be a lot more popular, considering that Herbert Hoover wouldn't be a president and wouldn't have made the effects which made the Republican Party as unpopular. The Republicans would still be very unpopular, just not to the degree that it was under Herbert Hoover. Um, uh, Calvin Coolidge would not run in 1932. Uh, However, he died. He died before Herbert Hoover was president, so that means he would die during his presidency, and maybe he would live a few more months because of the health services that are provided at the White House during that time. But I'm pretty sure he would still die. And his president, Charles Dawes, would be the president for, I think it was a year or maybe a few months, but he would be president. I think he would still run for vice president in 1928. So, yeah, he wouldn't run in the 1932 election, and we'd maybe go with someone else who was popular with the American people because of his philanthropy acts and different from the current administration, which was unpopular. And guess who that is? Herbert Hoover. Yeah, in this timeline, we still have Herbert Hoover win the 1932 nomination for president. Just as a little reform to be a new Republican Party. Would this be enough to pry Franklin D. Roosevelt from the Oval Office? Hell no, it would not. And I'm just gonna say right now, Franklin Roosevelt would still be in office. He'd probably win to a lesser degree than he did in 1932. However, I could see Herbert Hoover getting a little bit over 100 electoral votes, but not a lot. A lot of margins. I mean, he'd do better getting. I'd suggest that Herbert Hoover would get about 44% of the popular vote instead of the 39% that he did in 1932. So yeah, Republicans are still popular, or moderately popular. However, because of their tankings, they would be damaged, but not completely damaged as it was under Herbert Hoover. A lot would happen under Franklin D. Roosevelt, being a bit of the same. However, with the bit more popular Republican Party, Franklin D. Roosevelt would have to be a little bit more conservative on his actions, being a little bit more conservative when it came to Social Security and just reform on basically everything in civil rights. So, 1936, Franklin Roosevelt would still beat Alf Landon. However, it wouldn't be as victory as it was in our timeline, with Alf Landon getting a few more states like New Hampshire and just in the Northeast and probably Kansas. And then 1940 comes around. Just stick with me for a moment. Republicans are a bit more popular. FDR has to be a bit more conservative, and he's worried that if he does run for a third term, he'd be even more unpopular, giving a possible victory to the Republicans. So what does FDR do? He really thinks about getting John Garner, to run for president, who was his vice president, and he would do it, considering that John Garner was a conservative Democrat. Would this be enough to win the election? Yeah, it wouldn't be. Republicans are so popular, and because of John Garner's very close election in 1940, Democrats would have to become a lot more conservative to win over those more moderate voters in the North. So, anyways, we're in World War II, baby, and guess what happens? Under John Garner's presidency, World War II would start, and the Democrats would still be popular due to the war. However, our Republicans would get a new strategy. Tried to convince, secretly trying to convince progressive Democrats to try to nominate Henry Wallace for the 1944 election instead of another conservative Democrat. Would this work? Yeah, the Democrat party would be heavily divided, and I could definitely see Thomas Dewey actually winning the 1944 election, considering that with the Democratic Party a bit divided, the Republican Party being more popular than it was, and people want a more internationalist when it came to foreign affairs. I think Dewey would win. It would be close, but I think Dewey would win. And if Henry Wallace or a conservative Democrat won the nomination in 1944, the other side would still be mad. So, yeah, I feel that Thomas Dewey would win this election in 1944.